Hello, my name's Agi Haines, and like most of you, I live inside a body. And this is really fascinating for a designer who's interested in visuals and mechanisms. So these weird and wonderful things that exist inside us have offered endless inspiration throughout design history, as well as within my own work. Sorry, I always find this image throws me off slightly because I find it so fascinating. But so really, the question that I'm asking is, how might our sort of morbid curiosity for the viscera of life affect the future of design, not only for our environment, but for us as sort of sentient sacks of flesh within it? So a lot of our sort of future visions of the body mainly comes from science fiction and film, but I'm sure, as you guys know, there's a lot of sort of seemingly fantastical scientific research going on, which I'm incredibly interested in, and not only in terms of stem cell research, but also more recently in synthetic biology and bioprinting. And in particular, Anthony Atala's work at the Wake Forest University, and here he is in 2011, and in his hands, he's holding a sort of peachy oval, which could be the potential future design for a kidney. And this kidney has been produced by printing layer on layer to form a 3D structure using cells from our own body instead of ink. And I found this really fascinating from a design point of view, because it's amazing to think that you could print skin or, you know, windpipes, bladders, or even things like hearts just with the click of a computer mouse. So this sort of regrowth and regeneration, this regrowth and regeneration is something that might actually offer us new design materials. So as we start to sort of modify ourselves, perhaps we could look at our bodies as a system of interchangeable parts. So in the modern view of the sort of digitalized, airbrushed, regimented, and perfect body, what would stop us searching for better parts than we have now? So I started asking, you know, what might the desired characteristics be, and how might these take shape? So are two heads better than one? And I often find that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein offers a sort of interesting paradigm for the ethics and issues I'm discussing here, in which Shelley writes, "Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world." And if you think about it, the monster's awakening is supremely frightful. The fact that we've brought something back to life from death through the means of science should give us sort of the thrill of achievement, but in fact it sort of leaves us with the ominous danger signs of contravening the natural order. And when we think of body parts that we might make in the future, it seems like a really distant concept, but in fact we're already living enhanced lives. So if you think about how in the past, how we've sort of modified our appearance and performance, you see that there are enhancements all around us. So some of them are so familiar we hardly even see them as enhancements at all, like teeth braces, or I can see a lot of you wearing glasses or walking sticks, which are quite different to those seen in a lot of films, for example, you know, like the machine gun leg in Planet Terror. But essentially, these are all things that are adding to our human function. And there are a lot of actual mechanical cyborgs that exist today that aren't just filmic. So, for example, Neil Harbisson, who was born colorblind, and this protrusion coming out the top of his head is essentially acting like a third eye. And what it does is it recognizes color and translates it into frequencies. So he's got a really amazing relationship with color that none of us really have. So after sort of learning the names of the colors and the frequencies that go with them, this is essentially turned into perception in his mind. And I always find it really fascinating that he says that people's faces sound different, and he says that Prince Charles has one of the nicest sounding faces, and I always find that really odd. And this is Rob Spence, and after having to have his eye removed, he had it replaced with a camera, of which he filmed a few documentaries. As well as Jerry Javala, who, after unfortunately having his finger amputated, he decided to have not only a normal prosthetic finger, but one with a 2 GB USB drive fitted in it. And these are amazing, like the fact that these sort of designs have come about due to disability, but they've actually offered an advantage to the user. Amy Mullins is an amazing example of this, and she was born with fibular hemimelia, so she had to have both of her lower legs amputated. But she's had a fantastic career. You know, it didn't affect her sort of future because she was the first person to wear the carbon fiber running legs. And these legs are amazing because they sort of raised a massive debate about advantage and whether they were offering her advantage over sort of able-bodied runners. And it was really fascinating because it sort of brought up the conversation about whether, you know, we should be designing prosthetics that just replicate human function or whether you can add something else, something that's potentially superhuman. And coming from a family of artists, the idea of extra limbs is something that was quite normal to me. So both my parents would come home with, you know, all sorts of body parts and leave them on top of the refrigerator. And here's my dad in his studio in Deptford, London. So growing up in these circumstances sort of made me look at materials in quite a different way. And if you think about the body, we're really made of amazingly practicable substances, and a bone in particular became an obsession of mine. The fact it's really flexible, but it's really strong and structural, and it can actually grow up to 1 millimeter a day when it's farmed in a particular direction, so like how people wear teeth braces and move them around using these sort of particular frames. So as a designer and a sort of self-conscious human being, the first thing I thought of was how could I change my face and how might that benefit me? So this project started around the time of the Olympics in London, and I thought it would be quite interesting if I could make my face more aerodynamic. And what might I need to do to my face to achieve this? So I decided to make a series of facial prosthetics, imagining what I might look like post-surgical procedure. And this was quite an interesting learning curve for me because it involved me sticking a lot of horrible stuff to my face. And it almost felt like my skin had gone through a procedure in itself. But it was amazing to see how these shapes might develop and experience what it might actually be like to look like this. And then I started going further, you know, could you have really long hands to like reach stuff? Or could you have whiskers to sense things? Or like bigger nostrils to smell stuff? And I was getting a bit carried away, sort of thinking that anything was surgically possible. And after talking to a lot of medical students and surgeons, I was really, really fascinated to see what really was. And then I went back to my research and I found something quite unusual. That these sort of modifications seem to be things that people do to their children. And again, from a material perspective, that really makes sense, because when you're a baby, this is when you're at your most malleable and maneuverable, especially your bones. And from the parent's point of view, if it's more socially acceptable to look a certain way, then you would want your child to fit comfortably within social norms. But what's weird is that, like, at one point it might have been popular to have a pointed-shaped head, but actually now it's popular to have a round-shaped head, and we still have devices today that keep our babies' head shapes even and round. So whether it's to do with health issues, you know, beauty, or job prospects, and therefore social mobility, parents worldwide are trying to sort of further their children's chances of survival. So I decided to design a series of babies, each with modifications implemented by the parent to benefit the child later in life. So this was the first child, the aerodynamic baby. With its ridged nose, it might have more job prospects in the field of sport. So this baby, oh, sorry, I've gone too far. This baby, which I have with me today, has a higher head surface area to dissipate heat. So the idea is that in the wake of global warming, it might be able to live more comfortably in a hotter climate. This baby, which has larger cheeks, might be able to absorb more caffeine and therefore work for longer hours and earn more money. And then some of them were for health reasons. So as pollution increases, so does the incidence of asthma. So this child has a toe removed, which might encourage it to contract something like hookworm, which is a parasite which potentially might actually lessen allergies, which a lot of research is going into now. And finally, this baby, which people often find the most visually disturbing, has a new orifice in the back of its head, which would mean it could absorb drugs over a longer period of time, and that would help it if it suffered from something like diabetes. So after doing this project, I found it really fascinating that that these sort of opposing sentiments that are thematic in Frankenstein. So on one side, we've got the desire for advancement and enhancement, and on the other hand, we've got the sort of risks involved in sort of achieving this. And this is sort of an ancient and deep-seated aspiration, but we should look at things like, the Greek tale of Icarus flying too close to the sun to show us that our sort of inherent desire to modify ourselves could alter what it fundamentally means to be human. And in augmenting ourselves, we've already come up with a lot of devices to do so, and some of which are quite invasive, all in the name of physical enhancement. And I found it interesting that we might actually be sort of building a bit of a blind spot to brutality, all in the aim to disseminate research, in which some of these enhancing tools actually have more visual connections to things like horror films. But what might this mean for our actual evolution? We still can't see or smell or taste half as well as these really amazing creatures around us. Would it really benefit us from having the circulatory system of a penguin, or sort of the skin of a rhinoceros, or the lungs of a porpoise, for example? And it's weird because when I show people the babies, they often find it odd that we might decide to engineer ourselves, but we've been doing this to animals for hundreds of years. This sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger of the cow world is called the Belgian Blue, and it's been modified before birth in its sperm to have a mutation where it builds muscle mass. And this is purely to create leaner meat with a lower fat content. And one of the breeders of this really amazing cow says that it's a story of improvement and evolution, but surely only for mankind's advantage. And if you know anything about crafts, you'll know that, unfortunately, food isn't the only reason that we modify animals. So for some reason, we've got this desire to create a huge variation in dogs, from the Great Dane to the Chihuahua. Smaller and smaller pooches with bigger eyes, flatter backs, sort of fluffier tails, and weirdly more skin, has all sort of come from human intervention, but has actually led to quite a big health issue within dog breeds, the worst of which is syringomyelia, in which fluid-filled sacs sort of grow on the spinal cord and press on the brain. And that's purely to create these sort of really cutesy dogs with, bigger eyes and a taller forehead. So surely the sort of knowledge obtained through these injustices should give us a bit of a warning about what it might be like when we start to modify ourselves. And another example is this amazing kitten that's been engineered with the genes of a jellyfish. And when I saw this, I couldn't believe it was real, but it glows under certain light. So we can almost imagine easier implementing these sort of technologies on creatures because we already view them as products. So from a design perspective, it kind of actually makes more sense. It's almost like the next step to buy a kitten that could double up as a nightlight. So I tried to imagine myself as Frankenstein, putting bits of stuff together to create hopefully new functions. I imagine the body as like a mechanical system with disorders as malfunctions that could be technically rectified. Oh, sorry. So, sorry, this is meant to be a film, but I decided to design a series of organs. And the idea is that if we have the opportunity to put hybrid things together, so bits from humans and bits from animals, we could potentially create functions that it would take evolution millions of years to create. And what sort of the benefit of these organs, would they outweigh the sort of risky surgical procedures that go with them? So essentially, this one is like a biological defibrillator. And the idea is that it would have a suction pad that sits on the top of the heart and a row of cilia cells that recognize unusual movement. And as they do, they would cause a muscular wall to contract, which causes a layer of electrocyte cells similar to that in an electric eel to discharge, which is enough to shock a human heart. And it's amazing because electric eel actually can form a high enough voltage to do so. The next organ is for people who might be susceptible to a stroke. And it's got a little pouch of sort of osmotic cells that can recognize liquid pressure, and a salivary gland from a leech that might be able to release anticoagulant hirudin, so it could potentially thin the blood and prevent you from having a clot. And finally, this organ, which is for people who suffer from cystic fibrosis. And that's a disorder where your respiratory system produces too much mucus. So this is made from the wall of a rattlesnake, the muscular wall, which can vibrate for really long periods of time using very little energy. And this would sit on top of the trachea and dislodge mucus, which could then travel down these tubes and out this little section at the bottom where it's dispelled through the digestive system. So it's amazing that we have this sort of selfish relationship with the world around us. You know, we modify everything to suit our needs and desires. But like these projects, it might make more sense to sort of modify us to suit everything, you know, the world and live more sustainably in it. So it seems like for millions of generations, you know, organisms have been nicely designed or fitted by the blind force of natural selection. So perhaps now we're just sort of taking control of our own evolution by editing, you know, extending our idea of the human body. By editing the way that we live, we've already created new futures. And maybe the next phase of evolution is just sort of directed evolution or design, where we're actually physically altering the physiological forms that inhabit our planet. But are we ready to sort of take on this godlike ability to manipulate the plasms of life with unprecedented power? And are we, like Frankenstein, ready to accept this weird relationship between creator and created? Thank you.